Um, you've come up with a modest proposal. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, it's extremely modest in some ways, but it's also a modest proposal. It's immodest because its aim is to reshape the eurozone. So in that sense, it's not modest, but it is modest in one important way. When most people talk about reshaping the eurozone, they start talking about federation. Federation would be great, but it will not happen, and it can't happen in the time frame of the crisis. So by the time we start talking about it, there will be nothing to talk about. The euro will be over, and once the euro is over, Europe is over. Then we're going to go into a process of a centrifugal process of breaking up completely. It will be a war of all against all. Hopefully not a hot war, but at least it will be the disintegration of Europe. So the federal option is a non-option. Anybody who starts talking about federal option has given up on the project of keeping Europe together now and preventing another 1930s. So our remit with this proposal was to think of ways in which existing institutions could be reassigned different roles that would effectively change the architecture of the eurozone, arrest the crisis, and create the circumstances for a new investment-led recovery throughout Europe. That's the plan. And it comprises three simple ideas, three simple proposals, which correspond to the three crises that we have in Europe. Because in Europe we have three crises, we don't have one. It's one, but it has three components which feed off each other. One is the banking sector. We have a basket case banking sector. The banks are bankrupt. They're being drip-fed by the European Central Bank. They operate like zombie banks, and they sap the energy that is produced in the surplus countries, while at the same time ensuring that the deficit countries will remain basket cases themselves. So we need to do something about the banks. Then there's the public debt that everybody talks about. And then, of course, there is what I call the investment strike. Capital is on a strike. They do not investing in Europe, with tiny exceptions in certain pockets of activity in Germany and Holland. So we have to do something about the banks, something about the debt, and something about investment. And we need to utilize existing institutions in Europe, because otherwise we simply won't have the time to organize a debate in Europe and referenda and all that will be necessary in order to change, to create new institutions. So the three institutions that we want to utilize and energize are the European Central Bank, which we have, the toxic European Financial Stability Fund. We want to detoxify it and give it a decent role to play, and the European Investment Bank. So our simple idea is to take the EFSF, the European Financial Stability Fund, the bailout fund, and stop it from being a bailout fund. Instead of giving money to Ireland, to Portugal, to Greece, because these bailouts really are not helping anyone, to use the 400 billion that it has raised, or that it's capable of raising, in order to recapitalize the banks, to plug these black holes. And I was very interested to hear Christine Lagarde, an otherwise inconsequential politician who just moved to the IMF, say something sensible for the first time in her life. She actually agreed with this proposal that we've been putting forward now for a long time, that banks have to be recapitalized by the EFSF. Now, what's the tricky part of that suggestion? Recapitalization means that banks are forced to take capital. They're not asked, would you like some capital? Because bankers don't want capital if they have to give them shares in return, because they don't want to stop being bankers. They don't want to lose their control over their banks. So, but you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't be running a bankrupt bank, expect the taxpayer to recapitalize it, while you remain in control. Sorry, this doesn't even augur well with principles of capitalism. Okay, what do you do with the debt? Because the FSF was meant to bail out the highly indebted countries. Well, the first thing you do is you stop treating this debt as if it is a problem of Greece, or Ireland, Portugal, or Italy. This is a problem for the Eurozone. And you take the debt of each Eurozone country, you split it in two parts. In the part that it was allowed to have according to the Maastricht Treaty, let's call this the blue debt, good debt, and the bad debt, the debt that you shouldn't have according to the treaties, the existing treaties, right? And then what you do is you take the blue debt, the good debt of each Eurozone country, and you transfer it to the ECB. You don't buy it. You don't have the central bank buying it. No, they simply transfer it. It's like you having a mortgage, which you can't repay, okay? Because the interest rate is too high, because your creditworthiness with the bank is not good. And then your parents, or me, or somebody with a better credit rating, right, gets a mortgage, repays your mortgage when it's due, services your mortgage, and then you pay me the installments for my mortgage, so it doesn't cost me anything. You end up paying your mortgage, but at much lower rates, and perhaps with longer maturity. So this is the idea. The idea is that the ECB acts as a go-between, to put it in a vulgar way, between member states and China, or Russia, or private investors of the world over. This glut of savings that they have it and don't know what to do with it, they will not give it to Ireland, they will not give it to Greece, because they don't trust Ireland, they don't trust this, but they trust the ECB. So the ECB borrows by issuing Eurobonds, its own bonds, not guaranteed by Germany, by anyone, just guaranteed by the ECB. And when the bonds of the member states mature and they need to be repaid, it's the ECB that pays them. And then when the Italian bond, the French bond, matures, instead of Italy paying 5 and 6% in order to borrow again, it pays 2% to the ECB. Why? Because the ECB uses its creditworthiness and its reputation internationally to borrow on behalf of Europe and facilitate this effectively conversion loan. That way, the total mountain of debt in Europe is going to shrink. The markets will become ecstatic, and the interest rate spreads will fall for everyone, including for the red debt. So that kills off the debt crisis. So we've dealt with the banking crisis, we've dealt with the debt crisis, and that arrests it stops this feeling that we are in freefall as Europe. But that's not enough, because as we all know, the only way of killing a recession is through growth, and the only way of having decent growth and not paper growth is through investment in the real productive activity. Now, how do we do that? As John Maynard Keynes said, the capitalist is a fair weather sailor. During a crisis, he would not only jump into the sea, but he will also, in panic, destroy the boat that can carry him to safety. This is more or less verbatim what Keynes said. So you don't expect the private sector to do it. If you do, you haven't read your economic history. Now, as a Greek, I don't trust the Greek state to do it either. Perhaps you wouldn't trust the Scottish state, the Scottish government, or the British government. But I do trust the European Investment Bank, because the European Investment Bank is a very interesting institution. They have a very good track record of large-scale investment projects, free of corruption, run usually on time, and with a tendency of being profitable. The European Investment Bank has, as we speak, is twice the size of the World Bank. This is a fact that very few people know. It can be, tomorrow, 4 times the size of the World Bank if one clause in its charter were to be changed. It's a clause which says that if the EIB is to invest in Italy or in Greece, 50% of the project needs to be financed by the member state. Now the member state is bankrupt, so the European Investment Bank, even when it wants to invest, it can't. It's like a giant with its arms tied behind its back. Well, if we've created the Eurobonds by the ECB in order to tackle the debt of the Eurozone, then why not allow the ECB, in conjunction with the EIB, with the European Investment Bank, to issue some additional Eurobonds, only on the basis of a business plan that the European Investment Bank has for some high-speed railway that goes to Scotland and connects Greece to Austria, whatever. These are just examples. Infrastructure, high technology, and even green technology projects that would be which would tackle both the economic and the ecological crisis at once. The European Investment Bank wants to do this, and if it guarantees the prospective profitability of these projects to the ECB should be quite happy to issue some more Eurobonds, which will they pay for themselves. We could have a stimulus in Europe today of around 5% of Eurozone GDP. This is bigger than the Marshall Plan. That would kill the crisis completely and utterly off, because we would have arrested the debt crisis, we would have sorted the banks, and then we would have a major investment-led growth. So this is the modest proposal. It's not very modest, but at least it is something we could do within a month without any new institutions. In that sense, it is modest.